Genau, der Herr Dr. Willie Soon. Er ist Astrophysiker und Geowissenschaftler und eine der führendsten Autoritäten auf dem Gebiet der Beziehung zwischen Sonnenaktivität und dem globalen Klima. In mehr als 33 Jahren seiner Arbeit hat Willie Soon mit seinen Entdeckungen Computermodellierer und Befürworter herausgefordert. Diese haben den Einfluss der Sonne auf Wolkenbildung und weitere Phänomene deutlich unterschätzt. Soon hat sich unethischen und oft verleumderischen Angriffen auf seine Forschung und seinen Charakter oft widersetzen müssen und ist jetzt aber zu einem der weltweit angesehensten und einflussreichsten Stimmen geworden für den Klimarealismus. 2018 gründete er das Center for Environment Research and Earth Sciences, um ein breiteres Spektrum an Fragen und Themen ohne Ängste und Vorurteile angehen zu können. Ich heiße ihn herzlich willkommen, Dr. Willie Soon, zum Thema die Kunst, die gesamte Sonneneinstrahlung seit 1700 zu berechnen.
There is a rumor that supposedly John Kerry, Al Gore, and Bill Gates are listening in attentively. So, hello, Bill. And I put my phone here just in case they might call me for emergency session. Well, I have a very simple task. I'm here to speak to you my favorite subject, which is the sun. Right? I've been studying the sun for a very long time. And since IPCC has proclaimed that the sun could not affect the climate, I want to be assured that at least I can teach you one Hungarian word. This is a bottle of wine called solar wine, Nabor, from my friend Professor Laszlo Zaska. Anyway, we'll drink that tonight. In case you're wondering who Michael Connolly and Ronan Connolly are, they are actually my dear friend from Ireland, and we three stooges has been working very, very hard. And we've been trying to understand what the science versus science is about, right? They even have a trademark for those kind of discussion. Essentially, basically gangsters, right? Talking about all kinds of things that is very anti-scientific and then dress it as science. So it's very confusing, but it's really not that confusing, you know. What are you talking about, guys? Anyway, the IPCC have a process in which they say that they have identified that the sun play no role. Really, I mean, you know that result. So everything that we have observed since the 1950s has to be human cause, which is the rising carbon dioxide, right? And the way they frame this problem, actually, science is all about framing and asking the right question, isn't it? They turn the whole thing into cartoon science, so it's no longer science, really. It's very difficult to use the word science. They try to describe this thing as, like a system that is sitting around, just let you push it, right? It's a radiative forcing in watt per meter square. And then they consider the man-made factor, anthropogenic, and then natural factors. Natural factors, they are very specific. It's only solar and volcanic. For the man part, they actually up to 11 of these smoking guns, okay? They are very, very sensitive people. They study things like black carbon, they study things like contrail, they are studying things like stratospheric vapor. By the way, I cannot see the line, right? It's just zero. And laughing gas, ha, 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 and all that, of course, methane, which is the cow fart. And laughing aside, I can tell you that just the framing itself, they kind of win the argument, right? Because when you look in terms of the solar forcing and volcanic forcing, IPCC is extremely talented. They built consensus. They get a bunch of these scientists just sit around and then just decided all our futures, regardless of what the state of the science is. That's why it's very embarrassing in some sense. But anyway, they say that for the solar forcing, you got to look at only this curve. That's proposed in the 2021 AR6 assessment. And but I want to go back. For the volcano, I felt very bad about volcanologists, by the way. They have essentially thrown in the tower. The whole field of volcanology should stop, really. Because they turn volcano into cartoon too. Because no two volcano eruptions are alike, isn't it? Because they all turn everything into quantified in this thing called the volcanic forcing. It's just basically a quantification of having this emission out with certain amount of sulfur. They never even quantify how much each of the volcano give up the amount of sulfur. Therefore, you have all these particles around with all the dust, and you form sulfate aerosol. And then it immediately turn into a negative forcing. This is a very sad part because this is actually not science at all, to be honest with you, okay? And the sun part, which is the part that I will elaborate. So finally, when you compare the man part, the volcano, and the solar, there is absolutely no chance. Hello, Al Gore, but I tell you, if you are serious that this is correct, I'm sorry, the end of this conference and goodbye. Well, go home. I really should drink wine and depress. But the problem is that it ain't so. This is the problem. It just ain't so. And I'll explain to you what is the problem. Really, it's a bit IPCC, jumping up and down. Come on, guys, boil it up. Because they started to say it's global boiling, right? We have heard from global warming to climate change to global weirding to all kinds of different terminology that is all anti-scientific. But I want to introduce you to Mr. Bob, right? B-O-B, the bright orange ball out there. This is the thing that you really should study. It's a very strange phenomenon, really. They ask you to say that the sun could not change the climate system. But actually, to tell you the simple truth is that's why they frame it as radiative forcing, yes? What they did there is very simple. There's nothing to talk about because we all know, it's very obvious. What is the most significant factors is actually the Sun-Earth orbital condition. It's the season, yes? The changes over, if you annually average all of this, is 90 watt per meter square. There's no way you can escape from this conclusion. And then yet, they say that we subtract the season out. Then you look at the tiny little change. That's how they do it. It's as simple as that. Actually, the whole game is finished. Because my idea about studying the whole Earth weather climate system is actually to study how the, 2 summers changes over time and then, that sort of thing. 2 winters, that kind of stuff. Because no 2 summers are alike, no 2 winters are alike, which is a very difficult problem to actually address. This is why I hope you're convinced that Bob is very powerful. Bob is giving out a lot of power. You can see the number for yourself. 4 times 10 to the 26 watt. And then even this number, 2 times 10 to the 17, which is 2 billion times smaller, is actually just a converted energy from the sun itself. The absolute, actually the amount of heat coming from the Earth, this is actually the radiogenic heat. It's constrained by the measurements of geoneutrino, yes? By the experiment done in Italy, the Gran Sasso, the Borexino group. And of course, the Japanese are doing it too. Chinese are also investing to try to get this. But the number is pretty tight now, okay? Within a factor of 2, I would say. So that's another 10,000 times smaller. So the question I want to ask is that, could they have IPCC have underestimated the role of the sun, right? First of all, it's clearly they cannot be overestimated because they say it's 0. You cannot be smaller than 0, right? So for the sun, let's start with this particular video. The oldest quantity we know is actually sunspot, yes? Sunspot is nothing but the intense magnetic field region on the sun, yes? And you know that you need to study a lot of this thing in much more details than that. You have small spot, individual spots, and then you have very large group. The sun, by the way, physical size is very big, right? Across the diameter is 110 of them you can fit the Earth inside. And then, of course, in volume, 3 times of that. So 10 times, in fact, you multiply by the volume, so you will be 1 million or so of the Earth inside the sun. So you have to study all these little details. There are things called umbra, which is the most intense and the coolest region because the magnetic field is vertical. Penumbra is actually slightly slanted magnetic field, and plus the magnetic field size, the thing is a bit smaller. So there's a lot of this thing to study. And this is why sunspot has been recorded for a very long time. We know Galileo Galilei was very smart. He pointed there, the telescope there, and started to observe them. But the key insight for him is actually to keep observing it. Right? Kepler is very, very smart guy too. But then Kepler thought that sunspots are actually just transit of Venus. He didn't continue to observe. Then he would discover the phenomenon. And that's why the credit go to Galileo and a bunch of other earlier observers. And you know that sunspots come and go in roughly 11-year cycle, especially this period. In fact, there was a lot of confusion from this period onwards, 1645 to 1715 or so, which actually I spent my dedicated 52 weeks of my weekend doing a semi-popular book called The Maunder Minimum to try to understand and explain what is it about, right? It's actually, sunspot almost disappeared during that period for extended period of time, 70 years, very rare. You know that during a minima, you can have up to a year where you don't see sunspot really, but not 70 years, okay? So that's why it's a very unique time in the sunspot period where it would have some relevance. And we know that little ice age, the deepest, the coldest part of the little ice age period, basically from about 1300 to 1900 AD or so, right? The deepest, coldest period is in the 17th century, roughly. And It comes and goes, but the key idea now is that how do we turn this understanding of solar magnetism, actually studying how much light output is connected to the solar magnetism, isn't it? There are many, many more things you got to include. We call it solar proxy. It's just basically indirect measurements, right? That will involve something called a singly ionized calcium, right? These are all information that one can get, and then umbra penumbra issues. Unfortunately, IPCC, by the way, this is another serious problem. I put this out because I want to tell you that not only that they're trying to downplay the role of the sun, but there's a systematic group formed by people like Edward Cliver and a bunch of these guys. They've been actually trying to change the sunspot activity record, which means they say that the record here, they need to correct for it because they were started to worry. Here's a slide that illustrates this. Because my colleague, Douglas Hoyt, has been producing this thing called the group sunspot number. And it's been really showing that essentially there is a basically really systematic, gradual on the long time scale, every 100, 200 years kind of time scale that is going up and down, but it's increasing systematically since the 17th century. But then they say that that kind of explain the, what you call the current warming from the increase of, let's say, the solar irradiance, for example. They actually propose that we should move this part up and then shift the modern period down. This is a battle now that is ongoing, and we continue to work on this science. I shall provide you update in a year or two when we can write out our paper. We will try to explain why the whole proposal is bogus. It's not real, okay? But it's a very serious threat to science. By the way, I'm very selfish. I will be only speaking on behalf of science. I don't know anything about policy. I don't care about the policy, but I tell you that this is very serious harm to science, okay? So that's what they're doing, and it's not good. And then if you want to understand how the sunlight output change, I mean, you can see from just a simple example like this. This is just illustration of the sun from just visible sunlight, magnetism, solar. That one is measured in the magnetogram. And then you have the UV and then X-ray and things like that. It's just showing you that the sun is actually a multi-wavelength emitters, right? How can you actually think that just the sunspot record will describe the solar irradiance changes? That's basically the idea of IPCC. And here's a fundamental problem. It is what I call the most serious graph in solar physics. It's an embarrassment, okay? Sorry, I think 13 is not correct. If I count correctly, it's about 16 of this measurement. You remember, each of the project, by the way, these are all individual satellite attempt to measure how much the solar irradiance have changed, which means integrated over all the wavelength. It's actually a cavity radiometer. Just put a little pinhole and then inside basically painted very dark, and then you have very sensitive measurements because a lot of this detection are changing 1 part in 10,000. So it's a very sensitive measurements that you need to have. Very high precision to do this. And you see every of this attempt is a failed experiments, to be serious, okay? And all of it is value all over the place. I have to tell you that even when they put the absolute value and some of this, that it looks like apparently they agree with each other now, like consensus. This is completely just basically this group copying another. No one is doing any independent science. This is how dangerous science is this day. If you don't know the details, you would actually kind of support them. Oh, they have increased over time, so we should give them more funding. But anyway, here's a way to put this, right? This is basically based on a chart that is coming out in another paper that we're working with. By the way, one of our many co-authors are in the audience, people like Nicola Scafetta, who's actually done a lot of work on the EIKE satellite project, which is NASA JPL, right? So it's all over the place, up and down, but the question is that how do you put them all together? That's the whole fundamental question, okay? And I can tell you that it's difficult. This is the problem that science, when it's difficult, you cannot just pretend to say that we all agree. No such thing. Or else the problem would never be resolved, actually, if you keep pretending. And the consequence of how you combine them is very huge. So we give 3 examples. One example is basically the IRCRIM data sets. Basically, the red curve is the actual measurements, and then the green curve is actually what you call the sunspot number scaling, okay? And the group that magically have the sunspot number agree is the PMOD group from Switzerland, okay? And I can tell you in details, we have already documented that most of these are artificial because you know what happened? The Swiss group, apology. They started to adjust the thing to agree with the measurements. The actual satellite data to agree with that. So it's a very strange situation going on. And then there's a Belgium group also, which is kind of in support that you don't need, by the way, they will be very, very scared. You know what they tell them? Because what this implies is that all you need to do is that you want to learn about solar irradiance, you know what? You stop all the satellite measurement. Each of the measurement that I show you, the project, each of them $100 to $200 million, okay? At least. We just stop because all you need is the regular telescope and count the sunspot. It's very ridiculous if you think about it. Sunspot number, when it's 0, it means 0. But it doesn't give you the quantitative information. Here it says that for this particular result, think about it. It says that this minimum and that minimum is exactly the same. But IRCRIM actually measures something different, beginning to show that there is actually gradual, small, what you call circular changes. Okay? And that implication of this result is very, very amazing. If you tell them that, okay, stop, no more measurement, we just use sunspot number because that's what they say, right? But obviously that I believe that we should continue measurement and measure it carefully, have it well calibrated, but this result is the one that is highly suspicious. Of course, we have documentation to discuss that. So the implication is huge. Right? This is the standard, the Royal Belgian group measure this. Basically, each sunspot minima are the same. And then the one that IPCC proposed, actually a particular type of model that they used, that they added a few more factors so that it's a small change in the minima. Okay? The maxima are indeed changing. And then my colleagues, Doug Hoyt, and of course the data curve are updated by Nicolas Cavata to try to go up a little bit further to account for the modern value, because original work was published in 1993. So it's huge. The question is which one is correct? I can tell you that from my good sense, I think that is slightly better, but I kind of know that felt that the sunspot, the one that scale with sunspot, it's kind of not likely to be correct in that sense. So indeed, what do we do in science when you face such a situation? You be totally transparent, you report every result, isn't it? So we provide 27 pieces of the puzzle, which is summarized here. Okay, 27. And then later we ask some serious question. By the way, we have some specific thing. Don't mind that 8 IRCRIM scaling, 15 PMOD type, and then 1 community type, and then 3 is based on sunspot number scaling estimate. It's all over the place. So the question is which one is correct, isn't it? But let me now go into the story of IPCC, isn't it? Well, before that, because we published this paper in 2023, September, it did gain a lot of notice because it's been now almost downloaded like over 10,000 times, so people are becoming very worried, the IPCC kind of group. So there's this particular guy by the name of Chatsigorov, basically a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for Solar System Study. Oh, by the way, the IPCC recommended solar irradiation record to use is only one, right? It's actually based on two models. One is from the Naval Research Lab, one is from the Max Planck Institute, yes? They say that, you know what, each of them slightly different, we just take an average of them. It's very dangerous. Combining two incorrect results doesn't make it more correct, right? So that's a serious problem. But the question is that in our 2003 paper, we already pointed out, if IPCC were to consider, let's say, the Hoyt and Sutton result, they would not be able to make that conclusion that global warming is mostly human caused, right? But this person published a paper claiming that the Hoyt and Sutton result now is completely invalidated. So let's see what did he do that is so brilliant. First of all, before he do anything, so this paper was published in Solar Physics. By the way, we don't really have time yet to make a full comment and scientific exchange yet, but we're just beginning to understand what is happening. The curve that he plotted in his paper is basically the original curve is actually red, and then the dotted blue line is not a replication, really. It's just simply that he digitized the data and put that together. I don't know why he made a plot out of that, right? But then he didn't actually follow the method of original Hoyt and Sutton. When you say that you want to update somebody's result, you actually should follow their procedure, isn't it? Whether you believe it right or wrong is a separate issue, but when you say you update somebody, you have to follow the procedure. He decided to use a completely different procedure, okay? And then he made that. That's basically the same IPCC result, because he pointed out that his update now agree with his own modeling group from Max Planck. Oh, curve kind of looks similar. I don't blame him. Yeah, that's what it is. But the question is that, is this really valid, right? I don't think so. That's my answer to this simple question, right? Because we believe that if we were to follow the actual procedure, it will look more like this curve here, to update this with the dotted line that we added, right? And then his is continued to be that curve. So that shall continue. If we have the time, we will definitely need to write up a paper to discuss this openly. And then if this Professor Chatsigorov is not happy, he should come and discuss with us. We are working with Nicolas Scavata on this quite a bit too, right? And now let me move on. The thing that I want to ask now is that, do you know that in IPCC 4th assessment report, which is published in 2007, do you want to know how many irradiance record the IPCC recommend? It's actually up to 6 or 10 of the record. And one of them is obviously this Hoyt and Sutton. Okay? They actually have already agreed that, okay, this is a valid result and we should do that. And then during this period, from 2007 to 2021, what happened? In my humble opinion, nothing happened. They just say that this record all of a sudden ran out of favor. It's a very childish game, actually, in that sense. It's very strange. And then in the 5th assessment report, which is published in 2013, they actually recommended this 4 curve. This one, this one, this one, this one. But do you notice that they always propose the one that is very low changes? There's nothing there, the one to the right-hand side, which is the what you call the high value changes kind of thing, which you completely cannot rule out. Okay? That's what the state of the science is. And then finally, the 6th assessment, which is 2021, they recommended only one. So that's why I don't know what the next one, the 7th assessment coming out in 2028, probably they'll provide 0, right? There's no more record. It's finished because that's the answer. Because they know everything, the sun could not change anything, why do you even bother to put it in? You realize that if you compare on the scale of the chart that I showed in the beginning with the so-called radiative forcing, the sun could not compare with contrail, could not compare with water vapor in the stratosphere, could not compare. It's really strange actually. But that's the trick, okay? So, whereas we proposed, actually there are 8 of these things, right? If you scale it with respect to the, what you call the acrim calibration, there are 8 of these that's pretty large, actually, that you can actually study and use them. You should actually assess them. Even in terms of what you call parametric study, you should do that. Instead of just saying we can ignore all of this. That's why we publish paper to explain that IPCC is just basically highly selective in what they do. They just ignore all of this with no legitimate reason. So therefore, the conclusion that they make, that all the observed changes from the 1950s, since the 1950s is all man-made, is not legitimate. It's not correct at all. Okay, IPCC, if you don't like it, I'm really sorry, but we have published this paper. But the question that I ask very simple, can you say that this single choice is correct? I hope you can reach your own conclusion. Let me say no. That's the way I would conclude, right? So it's a tragic situation. Something so simple, by the way, it doesn't take much work. Even a postdoc can do this, right? Or even a PhD student, you should really study this thing. But the problem is that a lot of these students now, this is the day they're somehow, their brain go insane, they're not studying science. They just basically want to become activists. I mean, really, it doesn't matter. Even in physics or mathematics, these people just turn into activists. So no wonder it's true that 97% of the scientists agree with whoever is funding them, right? So the 3% of us is actually fighting really, really hard. It is a political movement. All right, let me go now to some very serious problem. I'm very glad this morning that Craig Rucker and Mark Morano, James Taylor, and even Marcel, they all explained a bit of the history. This is the origin of a history that I think not very well known, because I happen to be very busybody. I study everything, right? It turns out that it's a very strange phenomenon. You can find out that it's so unscientific or anti-scientific. Okay? It's like anti-Christ. It's a very early on already hidden in this paper in 1985. Hansen became very famous when he go testify in the Congress, right, the Senate, in 1988. But in 1985, they already invented this idea that life in the planet Earth is such a way indeed that before man come along, making a lot of fun and all kinds of things, but before man come along, the system just would adjust itself. It's in some kind of equilibrium. Yes, the atmosphere, the tree, the plant, the soil, everything is in equilibrium. man come along, burning fossil fuel, emit carbon dioxide, all this stuff. By the way, CO2 is not energy, right? If you add more CO2, all you do is you change the rate of the atmosphere cool itself. Yes, you don't change that, and it's impossible. For example, if an ice age come, I hope that Al Gore will really blow a lot of hot air that maybe it will start to melt all the ice sheets, because it is not a form of energy. It's the sun that is 99.9% of it. So if the sun change a little bit, yes, they will have some change. You can put a lot of CO2 all you want. There are a lot of discussion about role of CO2 in the climate system, right? It is a passive player really in the system. But Hansen, in 1985, very brilliantly talked about this subject. He invented a variable, what I call pseudo-scientific or anti-scientific variable called Earth energy imbalance, because men come along to disturb the equilibrium, yes? But the whole idea that was invented, so it's published in Science, so you guys can look it up. Please, I encourage you to study, to really understand the history of origin of this problem. It's just a non-problem from beginning, actually. And the whole thing that he invented, this EEI, called the Earth Energy Imbalance, is actually purely political. Because back then, people were saying that, because we don't know much about the Earth system, don't you think we should study first, invest in research, science, and all this kind of thing to understand better? Then maybe we can respond later. No, he said, because we have disturbed the equilibrium, so we're going to add the heat. The heat is hiding somewhere. When you emit this, man-made CO2, the heat is hiding somewhere, and then later it's going to come and get us. So we cannot wait and see. It is about that policy that drives this kind of pseudo-scientific idea. And I will prove to you that this thing is completely nonsense, right? Later we'll look at some measurement and data, but that's how clever they are. And then he realized, he even admitted in some part near the end of the paper, that he actually realized that the system actually could adjust itself. Could reach certain equilibrium, because this tiny amount, by the way, the amount that he was proposing is at that time was 0.5 watt per meter square. Okay? And he asked you, so then it leads to the next question. The next question I want to ask is that how well can we measure the Earth's radiation and energy budget? I realize that Professor John Klaus is going to talk a bit about this too, so I will say it in the minimum sense that I want to achieve. My goal is to explain to you that actually we cannot measure this very well, which means, can we close the energy budget? Can we measure each part of the component globally and then average them? Do we actually close them? Do we understand all the factors, right? Actually, we cannot. But before we even do that, because my own group is called Center for Environmental Research and Earth Sciences, CERES, okay? Versus, of course, the other small letter, the CERES is basically that minor planet, the asteroid, the big asteroid. Because the NASA one is called the NASA Cloud and Earth Radiant Energy System, NASA CERES. I want to distinguish them so the terminology is not confused. By the way, I know I speak a little bit too fast, but please, if you are interested in the subject, you please take the PowerPoint. Somebody told me that he wants to copy this. Please take the PowerPoint and study them, and then, of course, I would encourage you to use it. If there's any mistake at all, please point it out to me or ask anybody to ask me more questions, yes? Or any of my colleagues that can answer. Well, let's not talk about the myth, but anyway, there's a lot of mythology in all of this. That's part of the reason why we chose CERES to be our center's name, yes? And it's a small little group, and I'll explain to you what we are about later, yes? Even the cereal actually come under this CERES stuff. Well, in any case, how well can we measure this Earth energy budget, right? You already see it. We cannot close the energy budget. It has an imbalance of 6.5 watts, despite the best effort. By the way, another important thing to clarify is that this NASA CERES system, the measurement, it is actually not a particular system. It's like a simulated product. Do you understand? It's a very different. It's a data product from combinations of 5 satellites, 7 instruments. One of them not working now, by the way, so 6 out of 7 is working. And then it has, you have also the kind of geosynchronous and then polar orbit kind of imager to try to deduce, basically try to get cloud and then try to detect aerosol field and things like that, right? Trying to see the flow of energy through the whole Earth system. They clearly recommend that, see that they cannot close the energy budget, okay? But the most puzzling thing, let me highlight the thing in a minute. Look, it's the same code, but I enlarge it. So they cannot close the energy budget net flux within 6.5 watt, which means you cannot close the energy budget. But they say this is much larger than the best estimate of 0.85 watt per meter square. based on so-called ocean heat content and model simulation. That is basically what you call the Hansen's Earth energy imbalance. By 2009 or so, this paper is from 2009, that number is roughly 0.85, okay? Think about it. You cannot you don't know the measurement within 6.5 watt, but you are saying that you can detect this. This is how corrupted the whole process is. Even the people that do this Noam Lok, he actually insists that everybody have to do this. The influence of this is very damaging for science, in my humble opinion. So that's the number, by the way. If you look carefully in one of the table, it shows you that's what they cannot close. Everybody knows this. Noam Lok knows this. Everybody participated in this project know about this problem, okay? Including, let me see. Yeah, Jim Hansen himself knew this. But you understand, he said more or less the same thing, right? He read the 2009 paper by Noam Lok, and then he published himself, and then he wants to talk about implication, right? But when the result is different from his expectation, he immediately said that this is implausible. This guy is beyond measurements, okay? He's God himself. And that's why I say, how does he know this? This guy is a bit crazy, you know? He invented a pseudo quantity, and then he expects everything to fit only his paradigm. If it's different from his paradigm, it's implausible. Throw the data away, he's essentially telling you. Just trust me, use my climate model, so on and so forth. This is the kind of science we are dealing with. So you call this science, I call it anti-science. By the way, you see the impact of this EEI index, because this is the paper that just published about a month ago in one of those Nature communication of Earth and environment. They're still talking about this, but mainly I want to talk to you, take the opportunities to kick them a little bit, because the question to us is that people, by the way, a lot of the problem is also related to climate model. In fact, almost all the problem is about climate model. The question is that, how good are the climate model, yes? This one, MODIS is actually at least an attempt to measure. And then this MMMMM is basically model. Just kidding. But it's about model, kind of a simulated product. It's nowhere close to, in terms of finding the total cloud fraction. That tells you that how bad model is. In fact, people are so impressed when you actually are able to have, in fact, most of them, you know the climate modeling project, there are over 30 climate model now, general circulation model, in all over the world in different scientific institutions. They always try to pump up their validity of their existence, is to say that, you know, sometimes we calculate something, you agree with the climate model. Oh, climate model must be very good. I always tell them, please, that's when I worry the most. Because you know why? You can be sure that 100% of the time, they got it right for the wrong reason. That is the problem. This is how bad those climate model parameterization is. I speak from a point of view that I'm a bit of a small-time physicist. I'm not a real physicist like those guys. I try to attempt to formulate climate model myself. You know, having an ocean with different inertia. You know, you do all the simple things, energy balance. You do those things. You can try to attempt to model. I did that myself, but you know now how many things you need to do to tweak. Everything is tweaked. There's no way that you can do this. In fact, we don't understand how the atmosphere and the ocean really equilibrate, right? Even their general circulation model, one of the well-known problems is that actually the oceans are losing mass. So it's a serious problem. So even mass conservation is violated in some of the model. And this is the chart that I think Professor Clauser will also show. The showing part is basically this, the observe. By the way, how is the CERES, NASA CERES product totally useless? I believe that there's one quantity that is more or less reasonable, which is the measurement of the planetary albedo, which is this black curve, covering from January to December, right? And then if you ask yourself how good are the climate model, you see it's worse than closing your mouth and just throw the darts and you're going to hit somebody. I don't know who's going to get hit, but it's very bad. This is actually not science, isn't it? Because it's just crazy. It's not good, right? Anyway, so you want to see the implication, right? The implication is that in a lot of this cartoon science, they still put that number, 0.6. Do you understand? These are a group from all those NASA guys who gave the NASA CERES data. And they will still stick to the game. Like I told you, in 2024 paper, people are still talking about it. They say over time, the imbalance, if you have aerosol, they may start changing, so it's going to keep changing. This is how crazy, but the punchline is basically in this paper, they forget that in 2012, by the way, Noam Lok is also involved in this paper, but the key author is Graham Stephen from Colorado State. And you see that when somebody, slightly more honest, I wouldn't totally trust Stephen Graham, but I want to tell you, look at the amount of uncertainties. Have you ever seen such a crazy, I use the word crazy, it is crazy, quantification of a hypothetical quantity that has a 0.6 plus and minus 17. I think they're still trying to look for this thing. They're still trying to talk about this. It's so frustrating because these people are really out of control. That's why I told Professor Harper and some of my colleagues.
I call that the bad penny.
Yes, I would say that first of all, I would attempt to cut their funding first. I'm sorry, I would let them be known that, I would cut your funding because you're incompetent. You cannot do work like this. So let me conclude. The conclusion for me is very simple. That the IPCC insists that they have already resolved this measurement of total solar irradiance is incorrect. They are very dogmatic in their choices. And there is no way in the world that they can rule out the rest of the stuff that we are showing. The rest of the field, especially the 8 that we show, that we think is of high amplitude variability. Regardless of what I truly believe in. I'm just trying to tell you our state of understanding is what the state of the understanding. You cannot do anything more about this. You either find another way to measure and another way to constrain the physics, then you can have some understanding. Then the second one is the energy, Earth energy imbalance. Remember, EEI, when you sleep, you remember EEI is a fake number. It's a fake number. Because that's what it is. It's just a really a political construct. It has nothing to do with science. But this is prevailing, by the way. Every graduate student, if you want to publish paper, you don't use this number, you're dead. Okay? And this is how bad the quantification of uncertainties. And now, almost the end, let me do a little bit of philosophy. This is, of course, the famous late Freeman Dyson. I highly admire him. He's a colleague of Professor Will Harper. He really said that, indeed, there is a central mystery of climate science. Unfortunately, it's not a scientific mystery. It is a human mystery. How is it possible that the whole generation of scientific expert is very blind to obvious fact? How is it that the people who are supposed to be expert, who claim to understand, are precisely the people who are blind to the evidence? It doesn't take a Willie Soon. It takes all of us to speak out and say something, because this is what the problem is. And I totally agree with Freeman Dyson on this. He's such a brilliant mind in that sense that he recognized the problem. It's all a bit political, Too many hand waving is very, very dangerous. And then finally, I do want to make an appeal. I've been playing this soccer for a long time. Unfortunately, I'm playing on this part. We've been scoring goal. Believe me, we've been publishing a lot of papers. By the way, please, a lot of this is not just talk, right? I have papers, yeah? A lot of papers. Please read it. It's a lot of papers. So we're playing on this game. I believe that the score now is 1-1. So in that sense, right, I would like you guys to consider helping our group. We are a very small group, only 3-4 people, the most I can afford. I pay a little bit to myself because my kids need to eat. They eat a lot, so we go to buffet all the time. But please come, www.ceres-sign.com, and we really follow the science. We follow science, we don't follow the sign that trademark like the IPCC, right? So anything you can do to help and spread the word. If nothing else, please spread this particular talk, spread the slides, and then if anything that anybody, Al Gore, are you listening? If you catch this thing to be wrong, you know what? You can do whatever you want, okay? I'll be willing to say I'm sorry, Al Gore. But anyway, that's about all I have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation, Willie Soon.